Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us in this Friday afternoon. Today, we're going to continue with our series of what's killing your plants. And this is more, the talk today is going to be more on the applications or like what can you do if you have a plant that is dying. So that's why we're going to talk about pesticide basics for the backyard gardener. As usually and as always, we are an equal opportunity provider. So if you need any more information or need any accessibility or accommodation, please let us know. And we have here the QR code and the website where you can get more information about it. Some webinar housekeeping details. This webinar is being recorded. And if you would like to check it later and share it with your friends or anybody that is interested, it will be posted on plantalk.org/webinars. You can also register for the upcoming webinars as well in that website. We're going to use today the Q&A feature for questions, so feel free to post them there and we'll do our best to answer them. We only have 2 more webinars on this series. Next week, we will talk about squash bugs and organic control. And then on May 23rd, we'll talk about tree borders. So feel free to register as well using this QR code or the website over here. We hope you are enjoying these webinars, and this is again are being focusing on what's killing your plants on diseases as well as pests that affect Colorado. Today we have our speaker, Lisa Blecker, and she is a pesticide safety educator in the Department of Agricultural Biology. She has over 15 years of experience in pesticide safety education, previously at the University of California and now at CSU. And she not only teaches for credit, so undergraduates and graduate courses on pesticides, but she's also very involved in the education of pesticides applicators across the state. And that's a huge responsibility, I think. So thank you, Lisa, for all of that. She also helped us with our green school and non-credit courses in terms of pesticides education, as well as understanding how we can use them. We also have John Morgul, and he is going to help me today answer questions. He's the horticulture and natural resources specialist in Douglas County, and myself, Mario Ortiz Castro, as an education specialist, we will help you in the background. I'm just gonna say a disclaimer before we start, and is that we are not gonna advocate if you need to use or not use pesticide. This is not that talk. This talk is to give you information and resources for you to make an informed decision whether or not it is appropriate to use it. So I know this can get some controversy around the use of chemicals, but that's not what we're going to talk today. It's more of like if I need to use one or if I made the decision to use one, what's the best way and how I can avoid the potential consequences of using those. So thank you, Lisa, for being here, and now I'm going to give it to you.
Great. Thank you, Madi. Let me just take a second to share my PowerPoint. Okay.
Yes.
Does that look the way it should go? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Madi, for that great introduction. I always feel very confident about myself after I hear Madi introduce me. So if you ever need a boost in confidence, just ask Madi to introduce you to a group, and then you'll have that. So we're going to talk about pesticide basics for the backyard gardener. And this is the path that I've chosen today. So I want to just start and get a shared definition of what is a pesticide, and then help you choose the right pesticide if you make the decision to use one. A lot of times I get questions about how do I know what is safe? So I'll give you some guidelines for making a decision for yourself if something is safe or not. And then reiterating some safety precautions when you do use pesticides, and then some guidance on when it's time to hire a professional applicator, somebody with extensive training on making pesticide applications. So just a quick caveat disclaimer. Pesticides are used as part of an integrated pest management program. I am focused on, my webinar is going to focus specifically on pesticides, but I don't want you to think that I'm just wanting you to skip to pesticides. There's lots of pest management tactics that can be complementary to using pesticides, or even if they're not complementary, there's other pest management techniques. I'm not advocating for pesticides over all of them. I'm just jumping straight to pesticides, assuming that you're using them in an IPM context. And then I'm not really going to answer any questions about managing specific pests. So if you have flea beetle in your sugar beets or your table beets, I'm not the person to answer that question. And that's actually just not the point of the webinar. So what is a pesticide? So I want you to think to yourself, what do you think is your definition of a pesticide? So just take a minute to think, if somebody asked me what a pesticide was, how would I explain that to them? So I like to start with the definition that comes from FIFRA, and FIFRA is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. It is the federal law that basically governs what we can and cannot do with pesticides. It's a very important law when you're talking about pesticides. And this is the regulatory definition. So it's a substance or mixture of substances. So you probably said something like it's a chemical, and that's what this says, substance or mixture of substances intended. So you're using it on purpose for preventing, destroying, repelling, or mitigating any pest, basically. Whether your pest is an insect, a rodent, a weed, or what have you, a pest in and of itself, like it's something that is alive, and we want to keep it from living its best life. We get to decide for ourselves what a pest is. So basically, it's a chemical or a mixture of chemicals that we're using with the intention of causing harm to a living thing that we have determined to be a pest. So if what's going on fits the definition of a pesticide, it has to be registered by the Environmental Protection Agency or specifically exempted from registration. So if a pesticide or if a chemical that you're using to cause harm to a living thing is not registered or exempt from registration, simply put, you should not be using it. Now, intent of use is really important. So that's the intended part of the definition. It's whether it's registered or not, if you're using something, vinegar, salt, soap solution with the intention of causing harm to whatever the pest is, a weed, an aphid, what have you, then you are actually using a pesticide. You're doing that action on purpose. If that substance is not labeled or lacks an exemption, it would be illegal to use it for pest control. There is an exception in that home remedies used only on your own home and for non-agricultural situations, you're basically not regulated. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm advocating for home remedies. I just knew that the topic would come up. I actually don't encourage the use of home remedies because, and I'll tell you a little bit more about pesticides, and I'll bring it back to why there may be a problem with home remedies. Basically, they're just untested. They're not consistent. There's no safety information about mixing all of these chemicals. And so, yes, you can use home remedies and you're not going to get arrested. However, it's typically not recommended. So there are many types of pesticides. So the word pesticide in and of itself is an umbrella term. It is more of a broad term to describe all of these chemicals that can harm a pest. Okay, so some people think, oh, I don't use pesticides, I just use a weed killer. A weed killer is a pesticide. And so traditionally people think about pesticides as being insecticides, so controlling insects, but really pesticide is a more broad term than that. So the word "cide" means to kill, right? And it's a Latin term. So if you're trying to kill, for example, rodents, you would use a rodenticide. If you're trying to kill insects, you would use an insecticide. If you're trying to kill a plant, you would use an herbicide. If you're trying to kill a plant disease or other type of fungus or a fungi, then you would use a fungicide. Just like there are miticides and algicides. And so anything that ends in "side" is a type of pesticide. So when I'm talking about pesticides, I could be talking about any of these, a chemical used to target any kind of pest, not just simply invertebrates. So I'll I'll pause here and there to see if there are any questions as I go to the next section. So I'm just, if there are questions, John, feel free to break in. Okay, let's talk about some principles to follow for choosing the right pesticide. There are many different types of pesticides. I mean, we just talked about, all of the different pests that can be targeted by pesticides. So I want you to choose wisely. So what things do you think, just think this to yourself, like what things do you think you should consider before you're choosing to use a pesticide? What are some components or like characteristics of a pesticide you might want to consider before you make that purchase and make that application? So I think that you should consider the pesticide type. So making sure you're targeting the right pest in the pest targeted. I think you should consider pesticide toxicity, not just to the environment, but also to humans, because you can be exposed to pesticides in the process of applying them. And in fact, that's where a lot of the exposure actually comes. And then thinking about broad spectrum versus narrow spectrum pesticides, so selective versus non selective. And I'll get into a little bit more detail about all of these. So, but first, before I dig deep, I want to just propose or like present to you with some resources that you can use to help you identify pests and help you identify management tactics, whether they are pesticides or just other components of an IPM system. So at CSU, we have the Center for Sustainable Pest Management, and here's a couple screenshots of that website. So you can search for pests by category, household pest, agricultural pest. And so maybe you're not an agriculturalist, but you are growing food in your backyard. That agricultural pest section may actually have a little bit of relevant information for you. Same thing with fruit trees. Another resource that I like to direct people to are our CSU extension fact sheets. This is just a couple of screenshots from some of the topic headings of some of our fact sheets. And I just want to point you in the direction of like the yard and garden specific ones, and also some household insects as well. So again, these fact sheets talk about pests relevant in Colorado and some management techniques. Furthermore, I have colleagues at the University of California statewide integrated pest management program, and they do a lot on more like home, garden, and landscape pests. So things that I want to point your attention to are pest notes, and that's basically their version of a fact sheet. They're peer-reviewed fact sheets that go through any number of pests, like a significant collection of pest management information. But also there's some information in there about specific pesticides and its toxicity. So this is always a good place to kind of double check some information. So it's important to point out to you that all pesticides will have a label. All pesticides that are registered, and even a few that are exempt from a registration, they will have a label. And so those with the registration, that label is the law. Remember, I was talking about FIFRA and how it defines a pesticide. I'll talk a little bit more about FIFRA, but basically it is against FIFRA to use a pesticide in a way that is different than what the label tells you to do. This is a representation or a translation of safety and use issues that before a pesticide is registered, there's lots of tests done, lots of risk assessments conducted. to figure out what is actually safe for people, for like applicators, for people who are eating food, for people who are exposed to pesticides in their environment. And so this is a translation of what is considered to be safe. So all pesticides that are registered will have this statement. It is a violation of federal law to use this product in a manner inconsistent with this labeling. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, how likely is it that the Colorado Department of Ag is going to show up on my doorstep if I'm spraying something on my own tomatoes that I'm not supposed to? And you're right. They're probably not going to show up. They're not coming after you. But things are, the label is the law because it gives safety instructions and what is actually recommended so that you can make sure that your tomatoes are safe to eat, actually. And then it gives intensive amounts of directions for use. And so it talks about the insects or the other invertebrates that this particular pesticide can control. And furthermore, it tells you where you can use that pesticide and the pests that it is known to be effective against. And so if you are using this on a location, on a site, or on a crop that is not represented in the label use directions, then what you're doing is not correct. It's against the law, but also it's really not safe for you to eat that product or to be exposed to that lawn or what have you if you're not following the label instruction. So even though these labels, when they come on the jug, the font is very small. Just because it's small doesn't mean you shouldn't read it. You absolutely get out the magnifying glass if that's what you need to do. What is contained on this label is not a recommendation. It is actually representative of what's safe and legal to use. So you know that, so you've done a good job of identifying your pest, trying other management tactics. You've selected a pesticide that you know is supposed to be effective against your pest and is allowed to be used on your particular site. You're following the use directions, the dilution instructions. You know this, okay? So you know that this is where you're going. I want you to also consider the selectivity of the pesticide that you choose. So when I'm talking about something that's non-selective, we also can call that broad spectrum. And basically, it just kills a broader range of pests. So if we're talking about an herbicide, it might be an herbicide that kills both grass weeds and broadleaf weeds. That's an indication that that herbicide is broad spectrum. Similarly, with insecticides, if that insecticide or even miticide, for example, if it kills or targets a broad range of invertebrate groups, then you know that is non-selective or broad spectrum. Whereas something that we would consider selective or narrow spectrum has just a smaller range of pests that it can impact. So an herbicide that only impacts broadleaves, or an insecticide that only targets like armyworms and other types of caterpillars and no beetles and no true bugs, for example. It has a more narrow spectrum. So how do you think that you would determine if your pesticide is selective or non-selective? Well, let me just harken back to the UC statewide integrated pest management program. They have that pesticide information on their website, and it can give you an indication of selectivity. But barring all that, your label, that pesticide label, is going to be a really good, it's going to give some really good context clues, or it might out and out express if it's selective or not. So for example, this is a professional use product. It's Roundup Pro. But on the very front page of the label, it says complete broad spectrum post-emergent herbicide. So it automatically tells you it is very broad spectrum. So it's not going to, like, you can't spray it on your lawn, right? Because it is so broad spectrum. It could kill more than what you want to kill. And then if you have, for example, insecticides or miticides, and their pest list is extensive. This is both of these are broad spectrum pesticides. And you know that because it not only targets armyworms, but also lace bugs and leafhoppers. Like those are completely different groups of insects. So if your insect list or your pest list is very long, you know that you've got something that's less selective or it's more broad spectrum. So why am I talking on and on and on about selectivity? So this is especially important when we're talking about insecticides because broad spectrum insecticides and also miticides, so anything that's an insecticide and a miticide, you know it's broad spectrum. They're more likely to negatively impact other invertebrates in our environment that we want. So natural enemies, predatory insects, pollinators, and other beneficial insects. So basically, if your insecticide kills a wide variety of insects, you could also be causing harm to beneficial insects. So that's why I want you to select something that, or choose something that's more selective, just has a narrower range of pests that it can control. So broad spectrum and persistent herbicides can also contribute to pesticide resistance. So this word persistent is important. It's something that lasts in the environment a little bit longer. And you'd have to get context clues from your label. Like if you can reapply a pesticide every week, it's not persistent. If you can only apply it once in a season or twice in a season or once every 2 months, then it's persistent. It means it just lasts in the environment longer. So it's good for control, but it also makes it more prone to moving off site in the environment or harming non-target species. Or when I say non-target species, it's the thing that's not a pest, the thing we're not trying to kill. So there are some broad spectrum persistent insecticides that have these very specific bee boxes on their labels. And when you see these, then you know that they can actually harm pollinators if they are not used appropriately. Okay. And so they have extra application instructions on them. These are typically what we consider to be neonicotinoid insecticides. So these bee boxes, you'll find them on outdoor foliar applied or applied to the leaves. And there's just extra steps that you have to take to make sure that you're not going to harm pollinators because this group of pesticides does have a higher likelihood of causing harm to non-target insect species. So you don't ever want to contact a pollinator directly. You don't want to apply these insecticides to flowering plants because flowering plants encourage or attract pollinators. So I took this list of recommendations from Lisa Mason, who also works, she has an entomology background and she works in cooperative extension. And she gives guest lectures to my class here on campus. And these are the tips that she leaves my students with. So choose the least toxic, least persistent pesticide. Again, persistence is a measure of like how long it lasts in the environment. If you're making a pesticide application in your home garden, you really don't want anything that's persistent. None of the pest issues are so significant that you need to choose a really persistent pesticide. And something that is as least toxic as possible. And I'll show you how to see if your pesticide is toxic to humans or maybe to beneficial insects. So always read and follow the label carefully, because that is a translation of how to keep humans and the environment safe from overexposure to that pesticide. Make targeted applications. So if only one of your plant species is being attacked by a particular pest, you don't have to spray all of your different plants, just the ones that are being attacked. Consider the plant host. So, oops, I'm sorry, press the wrong button. Consider your plant host. So if your plant is very attractive to pollinators or other beneficial insects, maybe don't spray it with pesticides. And then avoid applications when plants are flowering. Wait until petals have dropped. So since we're talking about neonicotinoids, I wanted to address new rules in Colorado about neonicotinoids. So some people think that they are restricted, and they're not. You can still purchase them. They are what's called limited use. In Colorado, um, we can I say we, but in general, it can be something can be a limited use, and the criteria for limited use is kind of whatever you designate it to be. What I mean is, in this case, neonicotinoids are limited use, and what that means for these active ingredients right here, or these are the pesticide active ingredients, not the only thing in that jug, but it's the thing that is killing the insects. Um, any product that is used outdoors that have these ingredients in them can only be sold by a licensed pesticide dealer. And so it's not an arduous process to become a licensed pesticide dealer, but for somebody who doesn't usually sell restricted or limited use products, it's unlikely that certain retailers will go through the trouble of being a pesticide dealer. So if you all of a sudden can't find imidacloprid or not Admire, but Merit or Safari, on the store shelves like you normally can, it's not because it's restricted. It's just because that vendor in particular is not qualified or licensed to sell that product. So you don't have to have a license to buy it, but the person selling it to you does have to be a licensed dealer. And if you go, this is a hyperlink, so you can go to the Colorado Department of Ag website. This is just a snapshot, but these are all of the pesticides with any of these active ingredients that are registered for use in Colorado. So if you're having to go to a different retailer, maybe an online retailer, and you want to make sure it's still legal to use it in Colorado, you can cross-reference it with this list. I have a slide later in this PowerPoint that says just because you can buy something online doesn't mean that you should. And that's the truth here. You may be tempted to go to an online retailer to be able to purchase one of these things that you can no longer buy in your local garden center. But I'm encouraging you, I'm asking you to verify that it's actually registered in Colorado as well. Because there would be a very good reason why it's not registered in Colorado. So those are my thoughts on how to select a pesticide. I will pause here in case John wants to pass any questions my way.
We don't have
Okay.
any questions, but I think we can continue and then do it at the end. If people have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay. So next I want to address, I get this question a lot, like, how do I know what is safe? So I've given you some criteria for helping you select a pesticide, and you want to know, but is it safe? I know it's legal. Is it safe? Well, that is a difficult question to answer, but let me just give you a little bit of regulatory background. So FIFRA is this federal law that primarily drives how we can and cannot use pesticides in this country. So there are a lot of words on this page. There are basically extensive scientific assessments that are required before any pesticide at all is allowed to be registered or exempt from a registration in the United States. There are certain criteria for exemption. Those are very low toxicity products. So I want to really specifically talk about products that have to be registered. So there are extensive years worth of studies like on human health, environmental impact, replicated studies, intensive studies, and put through risk assessment models. And basically, after all this evaluation, usually takes 5 to 7 years for one pesticide product to come to the market because of the extensive registration process. I want to direct your attention to this last bullet. The agency evaluates the active ingredients or the other ingredients in the product. There's some helper ingredients in there as well. And also the proposed use pattern, where, how much, how frequently it's being proposed to be used. And with all of the information that they've gathered or required to be gathered and put through their risk assessment models, if if that model spits out that the product, if it's used exactly according to label instructions, will cause no unreasonable adverse effects to human health or the environment, then and only then can it be registered. Okay, so that is their safety standard. So they've put in extra margins of safety into how much of each pesticide is allowed to be used in the whole entire United States. But this is their standard. When this product is used according to the label, which, remember how I said the label was the law, and that's why, then it is not expected to cause unreasonable adverse effects to humans or the environment. So unreasonable adverse effects is kind of wishy-washy language. I mean, there are very specific criteria, but what does unreasonable mean to you? It might mean something a little bit different to you than it does to me. To me, unreasonable might be, it's not going to cause me cancer if I use this particular pesticide in my garden every single year. Okay. I'm not going to be exposed to such a degree that I'm going to get cancer. I consider that to be a reasonable amount of exposure. But you may think cancer is not the measure of reasonability, right? Maybe you also apply the same pesticide once a year in your home garden, and you also don't get cancer, but it makes you cough or it irritates your eyes every time you apply it. You're still using it according to label instructions. You're doing it legally and safely, but that may be unreasonable to you. And so you may choose that even though it's registered and being used according to the law, it's still not something that you would consider safe. So I just want to caution you that, like, when somebody asks about safety, that's kind of a personal definition. So EPA may decide what is a safe and effective use that's not going to cause unreasonable adverse effects, right? And so that's the standard they set. But you can set a stricter standard for yourself. Just because somebody thinks something is safe doesn't mean it is, right? I mean, people jump out of airplanes all the time and go parachuting. I'm sure it is safe at some level. I don't consider it safe, and I'm never going to do it, right? So that's my personal take on that particular risk. So the label is a translation of the law. And this is just sort of reiterating what I just said. So really, if you're going to use the pesticide, this is why it has to be used according to label instructions, because it's a translation of all that scientific data that's been collected over years and years and years of studying this very specific product. So again, safety is kind of a personal definition, right? So when people ask me about safety, I try to steer them a little bit more to talking about risk, like higher or lower risk, versus something that's safe or not safe. And so I just want to take you through a little bit of a paradigm. So if somebody asks you if something is safe, typically your answer is yes or no. So it's, yep, it's safe and I don't have to take any precautions because it's safe, or no, it's not safe and I'm going to stay away from it. Okay. It also kind of assumes that safe is safe for everybody, and everybody's measure of safety could be different. Like, you may be extra sensitive to chemicals in the environment. So what's safe for me is not necessarily what you consider to be safe. Safety is way easier to explain. It's not as nuanced as risk. But the thing is, if somebody asked me if making this pesticide application were safe, I'd never say yes, because I don't want them to think that they don't have to take precautions because it's safe. Pesticides are only safe if you take the proper precautions. Okay, so this is why I like to talk a little bit more about risk. I can say one behavior is more risky than another, and one behavior is less risky than the other one, right? And I can talk about things like precautions to reduce risk. Precautions like making sure you're applying a pesticide only when needed, or choosing a lower toxicity product. So sometimes the risk is just higher for certain people, right? So people who are older, people who are really young, they're just more susceptible to the same environmental exposures, right, as just a regular old adult. Okay. And risk is a little bit harder to explain. But if you give the impression of safety, people tend to be careless, like, and they have a lack of vigilance, right? They may not store their pesticide correctly, and that in turn increases their risk. So I never tell people that pesticides are safe, because it depends, honestly, how it's used, what it is, where it's used, who's using it, and all of these things. So I like to talk in terms of risk. And so let's just walk briefly through this risk equation, because EPA, when they're registering pesticides, they look at risk as well. Okay. So risk equals hazard times exposure. So hazard being an inherent property of the pesticide. That ingredient is highly hazardous, moderately hazardous, low hazard. It is what it is. Like, that ingredient has a specific hazard level. But if you're never exposed to that ingredient, it doesn't pose any risk to you whatsoever. So let's walk through a visual of this. So this is like a complicated Venn diagram. So EPA looks at things like hazard, or the toxicity of the chemical, exposure, how much is allowed to be used in the environment. And they also look at vulnerable populations to make sure no one population is more adversely affected. So when EPA in the registration process looks at vulnerable populations, they're more looking at like children, and also other people with chronic health conditions, but also workers, like, so people who might be applying pesticides a lot. So we don't want to adversely or like disproportionately impact any of those members of our community. So where all three of these things connect, that's where we get the risk, whether something is very risky or less risky, right? So again, hazard is the inherent property of a pesticide, its toxicity. And so we can tell how toxic a pesticide is to a human by looking at the signal word. So all pesticide labels will have one of these caution or signal words on them. Caution is the lowest level of human toxicity. Warning is moderate, and danger poison, very high level of toxicity. Okay. So I always encourage people to stick with this category 3, something that says caution. It doesn't mean it's safe. It's less risky, and it's a measure of human toxicity. So it's talking about you and the people around you. So exposure is the frequency, duration, and route of exposure with the hazard. So if you're not exposed to a pesticide, there's literally no risk for you. It's the same way that if you never swim in the ocean, there's no risk of getting eaten by a shark, even though sharks are inherently hazardous or dangerous, right? But if you're never exposed to them, you're not going to get bitten by a shark, right? So if you're not exposed to pesticides, or you reduce your exposure, then your risk goes down. And then vulnerability, there's just something about a person that increases their risk. Typically, it's children, people who are pregnant, people who are older or have chronic health and conditions, or something else that is depressing their immune system. And it's like you really can't change the hazard of a pesticide or the toxicity, right? A chemical is toxic at its level. A person is vulnerable at its level, right? These are just inherent properties. So in general, what we can do is reduce the exposure, okay, to reduce our risk. And so that's what I like to talk to people about. So using pesticides only when needed reduces your exposure. Storing pesticides away from children and in their original container and in a locked cabinet, that reduces exposure. Keeping people out of areas where you're applying a pesticide, that reduces the exposure. So our goal is always to make this triangle, this risk triangle, just as small as it possibly can be, right? So we can choose a pesticide with a lower toxicity signal word, and we can reduce exposure, in particular to the vulnerable people in our community. So these are some of the things that I tell people to do to reduce their risk of pesticide exposure, okay? Lower toxicity products. So choose that caution signal word. Read and follow all label instructions, because that's what the risk assessments are based on. Keep your pesticides on target. Don't apply when it's windy, for example. Wear protective clothing, long sleeve shirt, long pants. I love having people add nitrile gloves and safety glasses. Always wash your hands, store pesticides appropriately, and don't allow children or anybody else into an area where you're applying pesticides until your spray has dried. So let's talk very briefly. I referenced some of them, but safety precautions when you're using pesticides. Basically, whether you're using an organic pesticide or a conventional, whether it's a caution, warning, or danger, you got to read the label. Read that label before you even purchase it to make sure that you're purchasing the right pesticide. Because nothing's more dangerous than like a full concentrated bottle of pesticide just sitting in your garage that you're never going to use because you bought the wrong thing. Okay. So buy the right product. Always wear long sleeve shirt, long pants, socks, closed toed shoes, chemical resistant gloves, and safety glasses are what I always recommend. Clean up properly, store those pesticides appropriately, and then know who to call for questions or emergencies. So buying the right product also means, again, just because you can buy a pesticide on the internet does not mean that you should. So this is a little training prop that I like to use. These are two pesticides. They're side by side. They look very similar. They're both called Knock 'em Dead, Bug Killer. They both have the same active ingredient, imidacloprid, okay? But if you look closer at the percent active ingredient, which is visualized here, so this is just the backside of those jugs. So this red with the skull and crossbones indicates the amount of concentrated pesticide or active ingredient in that jug. And you can see that they're different. The actual concentration of the active ingredient is significantly different. This jug on the left is a professional use product. It is not designed for somebody to use in their home, okay? Whereas this one is a similar pesticide, but much less concentrated, and it's designed for people like you using pesticides in your home. Do not ever use a professional product, even if, let's say, your son works at a place where their pesticides are there, and he's like, oh, this works great on the weeds at work. Dad, let me use this in your yard. No, the answer is no, because these are not safe for use at home. Again, just because you can buy a pesticide online doesn't mean that you should. Online dealers of pesticides aren't always aware of state rules. They are also, it's hard to enforce if they're selling the right pesticides to the right people, okay? So it could still be, just because you can do it doesn't mean it's not illegal. So here's another pesticide label, just give you an example. This is where you would find the signal word pretty typically on the front page of that label. So this one says caution, meaning it's lower toxicity to humans. And so that's what I encourage everybody to use a caution product whenever possible. This is on the right-hand side is our registration number. That's an indication it is registered by EPA and that it is illegal to use this product in a way that goes against label instructions. This is also helpful if you had to call poison control because somebody was exposed to pesticides. This number is gold, okay? People can find out a lot of information about a product from its registration number. The signal word and safety instructions, including first aid, they always come first. They're the first part of the label is safety. And then only after that do you get these detailed use instructions. Also, another reason to read carefully this label is because these brand names, these are Roundup, and these are for home use. Roundup's not taken off the shelves just yet for home use, but they're both branded Roundup, whereas the one on the left is a little bit more like a traditional Roundup with glyphosate as one of the active ingredients, whereas the one on the right has 3 active ingredients and none of them are glyphosate. It's just people recognize this brand. And so the company wants to keep selling you their products. So even if they change the product, they may keep the same brand name. This is very common with home use pesticide products. They keep a brand that people recognize, but they may change the ingredients. So this could mean a change in the different pests that it's effective against. It could mean a change in its safety. In this case, both of these are caution products, which is that lower level of toxicity. No pesticides are non-toxic, not even organic ones or exempt ones. All pesticides are designed to kill something that's living, right? So there are a couple resources I like to point people to. A toxicology call line from the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment. This is not in case of an emergency, but you can call them and ask them about chemicals, including pesticides. They don't give clinical advice. They're not poison control, but poison control, I should have added this to this. Poison control is always a good phone number to have just because we are exposed to so many things in our environment. Um, but also the National Pesticide Information Center. This is housed at Oregon State. They have a call line. They also have a live chat option. This is not AI generated chat. This is an actual trained person on the other side answering your phone call or answering your chat message. But they also have an email that you can contact or just a wealth of information about pesticides on their website. So let's talk briefly about when to call in a professional. So I like to reference this hiring a pest control company. It's a pest note from my colleagues at the University of California. And so I've given you the URL here. Basically, these are my suggestions. If your pests are indoors and you think a pesticide application inside your home is necessary, I always recommend calling a professional because anything inside your home is going to be a more risky application. And so, since we're trying to protect ourselves and the other people that share the home with us and and pets as well, that's a good tip for when to hire a professional. If your pest issues are complex, you have multiple pests on multiple different species, and you're having trouble sort of like figuring out a good way to manage them, that's a good reason to call a professional. And if the best way to manage the pest is with the higher risk product, like something that's a warning or a danger signal word or says professional use only, then you should call a professional. And if you just simply don't feel comfortable or knowledgeable enough to do it yourself, that is an incredibly good reason to hire a professional. So, my colleagues at UC, they give these tips for what you should do before you hire a professional. Do your absolute best to identify your pest so you know more about it, know more about its habits, and how harmful it can become. You can get recommendations from pest control companies, and they recommend that you contact at least three and interview them. Ask them about long term solutions to the pest problem, in addition to that immediate pesticide application. And then find out from that professional what you can be doing with sanitation and exclusion to prevent a reinfestation, especially if you're talking about like spiders, ants, rodents coming into your home. There's a lot of sanitation and exclusion that we can do after a pesticide application to prevent reinfestation. And then, last but not least, make sure the company you hire is a licensed pest control business in Colorado. Okay, so this is very important. You don't want to just hire anyone off the street because they're using a pesticide, which is an inherently toxic product. Okay, so this is how you can double check for yourself. You'll go to the Colorado Department of Agriculture. It doesn't seem logical, but you have to first go to the pesticide applicator search. And then from there, you can click on business. And so if you have their business ID, you probably don't. You can look at their name, or you can even search by pest control businesses in your county and what kind of pest control they do, different categories that they're licensed in. So licensed pest control businesses are regulated by the state. They're inspected by the state to make sure they've trained their employees correctly. They have the right licensure, they have the right insurance, and that they're keeping records and storing products correctly. So this can be like a really good safeguard for you. So I'll leave you here with some resources, and with that, I can answer any questions.
There's nothing currently in the Q&A.
Okay. does that mean I answered everybody's questions or that I stumped you and you don't even know what to ask me? I would love to hear some questions if you have any.
Eh, I think what people are thinking, I guess, maybe you just answered every question. Let's leave it like that. Eh, you talk about home remedies, and a lot of people say, oh, add baking soda and add vinegar and add, I don't know, soapy water with oil. I don't know. I have heard many things.
Yeah.
Uh, and I know you said that you don't recommend that, but what will it be like a recommendation if the people decide to go to that route? Because let's
Yeah.
face it, people will do it no matter
Yeah.
what. What will be your recommendation while people are posting questions?
So when you're using a home remedy and you want me to show my last screen again? Oh, okay. Okay, I will do that in a minute. I don't know how to do this all at the same time. My brain is not. Oh, here, share. Okay. Do you want me to share this screen with my email address?
Please.
Okay. So with home remedies, um, okay, regular pesticides are formulated, meaning they have a very specific mixture of chemicals, and lots of research has been done on them to make sure that they're actually effective, and that they stay on the target plant as much as possible, and that they move through the plant and things like that. And so you're very unlikely to be able to replicate that process. And yes, actually, if you put baking soda on things, it probably will help. But if it's a large scale infestation, I don't necessarily recommend home remedies, especially if you're talking about doing it inside of your home. Just keep in mind, I know vinegar is a component of home remedies often. Vinegar is very acidic. And in fact, to get real good pest control with vinegar, long lasting pest control, you have to have a very high concentration of it, which is actually not safe. There are actual registered products or like formulated products with vinegar, and they require a respirator because it is just so acidic, and it can still be harmful. Anyway, so I guess it's just to minimize harm, first and foremost, to yourself and the other living things that you share space with. And secondly, don't share it with anybody because it's for your own use only. And then also, they're usually not more like real persistent, meaning if you like a lot of times people try to kill weeds with like alcohol or vinegar or whatever. And yes, you can kill the top growth of a plant by putting all these terrible chemicals on them, these things that they don't like. But you're not going to get to the root because these home remedies, they're not designed to move through the plant and kill the roots, for example, with an herbicide. I guess I would just say minimize harm to yourself and other living things. I don't really recommend them inside the home in case something is harmful. I mean, soapy water, there's probably little harm to that, but also, like anything that you mix up, treat it like a pesticide. Don't store it under your sink. Store it out of reach of kids. Store it in a locked cabinet. Like you don't want them drinking soapy, vinegary water, even if it's not as harmful as a regular pesticide. So I guess minimize the potential harm. Yeah.
Lisa, we've got a couple other questions that came in. One of them is from someone who wants to use grass clippings as mulch for food crops, but they're new to the property. So they know that pesticides were used last year on the grass, but they don't know what type. When, if ever, will it be safe to use the grass clippings as mulch?
Well, that's a great question, but without knowing specifically what was sprayed, it's hard to answer because different pesticides have different levels of persistence. You also don't know who applied it and if they were following the instructions. Maybe they over applied. So it can still have residues of pesticides. And so I would be just really, especially if it's an herbicide, because the herbicide, not only then could you potentially be ingesting an herbicide that you don't want to, but it could also harm your garden crops. because you just don't know what herbicide it was, if it kills broadleaves, if it kills shrubs, you just have no idea the amount or what it is. I would suggest, I mean, anyways, it's hard to answer that. So it's kind of up to you, but you could do like a little test case, like have a sacrifice a plant and put grass clippings on there and kind of like over apply them. And if that causes harm to your plant, it'll be kind of like a bioassay that you could do. So you can try a test case. You could also try composting your grass clippings. So that helps everything decompose, including any chemicals that might have been sprayed on them. So that's what I recommend to people. Like if you just don't know, I just really wouldn't trust somebody I didn't know and didn't have any idea what they were doing. So, yes.
Great. There are two questions that are in the same vein. Both of them are about how you would recommend talking to people who are used to reaching for the bottle of Roundup or who want a quick fix and want to go right to the top of the IPM pyramid. Do you have any strategies for how to coach people to find less challenging or less broad products to use?
Yes. I mean, look into your pest management resources. Like if you have one particularly problematic weed, like it sort of depends on the weed issues that you have, whether it's best to dig them up or mulch them out or what have you, right? So it kind of depends on your weed. But I would say, it also kind of depends on the scale. So if it's a small scale area, just put some elbow grease in it. You know what I mean? Like, I would try to dig that up. I mean, Roundup in and of itself, people have problems with Roundup, right? Or people are concerned about Roundup. It is a caution product in most scenarios. So it does have low acute human toxicity, but you still may not consider that to be safe enough for you or your applicator or your family. And that is totally your call and you can do that. But I guess I would research the weeds and what is the best way to manage them. Some weeds that are persistent and perennial with like a long taproot, sometimes the best mechanism is to actually just do a spot spray with a particular herbicide that's registered for that use. So you can reduce the amount of pesticide you use by just doing a spot spray on the most problematic weeds. And then basically whatever method you use to get rid of those weeds, do your very best to keep them from reinvading. So I had a boss who once said, Mother Nature has a no bare ground policy. And that's true. If there's a bare piece of ground, something is going to sprout up there, whether you want it to or not. So, employ good cultural controls like weed fabric, mulching, proper moisture for the plants that you're trying to grow, things like that.
Good.
Sweet. Maybe one more. Oh, sorry, Mary.
Okay.
Is it
Go ahead.
maybe
No.
one more? Is
Yes.
there anything quickly that we need to know about changes to Roundup in 7 that would be important for clients to know?
So I don't remember all the dates with Roundup. So Roundup has not been banned. It has been, reevaluated by the Environmental Protection Agency, and they have found through their risk assessment, not a hazard assessment, but a risk assessment, that the amount of Roundup that you could be exposed to in the course of your lifetime does not cause unreasonable adverse effects and is unlikely to cause cancer. Right. So it has not been banned. It is still registered. But the registrant, because of all of these lawsuits that they've had to pay out, they are removing glyphosate products from the store shelf. So maybe not Roundup itself, because remember, I showed that example of Roundup that actually didn't have glyphosate in it. So it is specific to that active ingredient, glyphosate. They will be voluntarily removing them from like home garden center store shelves. So they're going to really focus on the professional market. And that is just a risk management decision. I can't remember the date, but I can follow up with Madi. I looked it up and then it left my brain. So I don't know. And then 7, I know that there have been additional risk assessments with carbaryl. the active ingredient in 7 is carbaryl. It is a very old insecticide, and the older insecticides are typically more broad spectrum, more persistent, and more toxic to humans. So I actually don't recommend that people in and around their homes use 7 or carbaryl, because it's just, to me, it's not worth the risk, because it is just a higher level of toxicity. And I know it is being further restricted. I don't know, but I can look that up. And then, Madi, would it be good to just collect all the links that I put in my PowerPoint and send them to you? Okay.
Yes, I was just gonna say I can send an email, a follow-up email with everybody that registered with these links, probably Monday, I'm gonna say, or whenever Lisa you send it to me.
Sure.
And I think these resources are important to like keep hand if you are doing your research about pesticides. With 7, I believe now the active ingredient is the one.
It's further restricted. I mean, a lot of
Yes.
the carbaryl products for professional use are restricted use, meaning a licensed applicator has to purchase and use it. So the status of the home use products, that's where I'm unfamiliar, but I can look into that.
Yeah, I believe that what you're saying is the most current information. Last question before we leave. Following up on the home remedies, do you know if there have been studies shown the effectiveness of these home remedies, or is just not worth
No,
it?
I don't know of any. I can check with my colleagues in California, because, for example, Bordeaux mixture is a home remedy used often in vineyards. So you can imagine it's used a lot in California. It is a combination of things. And technically, it's a home remedy. I mean, unless you buy it pre-mixed. So it's possible that there's some research being done on that, just because that it is a very popular home remedy. But I'm not aware of any research of home remedies. Um, I know a lot of colleagues are doing research on those pesticides that are exempt from registration and how efficacious that they are. And I can try to look for some information on that. But home remedies itself, I'm not aware of any.
Okay, that's good, I guess. But thank you, Lisa, for this conversation, and I'm glad that people have questions at the end. So we will be following up with an email to everybody that registered with these links and any resources that the instructor might want to share. Last thing I will say, thank you for staying 7 more minutes. Please complete the webinar feedback. This is our only way that we can keep going, maybe for next year, and receive funding to keep doing these type of informational sessions. Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a good rest of your day and enjoy your weekend. Bye. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Madi.